writing on her blog, and she is here today to share more insights from her career building efficient and effective engineering teams. Please help me welcome Mona Soni.
Thank you so much. I am a self-proclaimed lifelong learner. Whenever I get an opportunity to learn something new, I quickly jump on it. 10 years ago, I had a similar opportunity to attend a training, and that training transformed my beliefs and thoughts around how do we develop software. And I would say not just my life, but it's kind of had changed our entire industry. That word was agile. So I'm hoping this conference, software conference that we all are attending, will be that defining moment in your careers going forward. So with my today's talk, I'm going to talk about, let's go with this, how to build effective teams. So before jumping right into it, let me ask you guys a question. How many of you think with the introduction of AI in our industry, your jobs are going to change or maybe lost, or you'll have to acquire some other skills to cope up with it? So a good percentage of you, 80 to 90%, believe that you'll have to do something to cope up with AI and keep your jobs in the next 10 to 15 years. So I came across this very interesting articles on Forbes where the author talked about that how AI is going to change our landscape forever, and how can exactly we be prepared to handle that. So the few snapshots that I brought for you from the article, you can, I have the link here, so you can refer to my slides to find the article. But the main things he highlights is like we need to focus on how we are doing things differently to join the pace as the economy is developing, and also the important part around like how we can increase our speed, our output, and be more efficient and effective in the work that we do. So in my career, when I started as an individual contributor, it was easy for me to be more productive, more effective, because everything was in my own control. I could define what pace I was giving. I had a knack of optimizing everything, and I was doing that as every part of my job. But as I grew into more and more leadership position, it became more and more challenging because my success was not in my hands anymore. It was in my team. So I was this before as an individual contributor focusing on like my wins, but as a leader, I had to switch that my success is tied to my team's success. So whatever I do is not important. It's like how they do things. So that entire shift that we go through from like I to we and from me to us. So I had that shift through my career. And when I joined Dow Jones 2 years ago, I had 2 teams, which now grew up to 5 teams. So my biggest challenge was like I'm entering into a team that has been around for more than 10 years. Like Dow Jones, just for context here, I'm not talking about Dow Jones Index. We sold that 15 years ago. So we are Wall Street Journal. Anyone Wall Street Journal fan here? People read? So it's not just Wall Street Journal. We have other publications like Barron's MarketWatch, so a lot of finance publications, and we are entering into different markets. Like we have real estate markets, so we do different things. So coming back to my teams that I had, the first question I came was like, they have been around for 10 years. Now my goal is to make them be an important asset for Dow Jones. So how can I do things differently for myself, for the success of the company, and for the success of all these engineers? So I sat down with my team, started understanding. That was my first 3 months, kind of going through an analysis phase as to like what are their basic challenges, what are their problems. So I set on the journey to figure out how the industry is doing, what are their challenges, and what do the companies really do to make their teams more effective. And like in my research, I frankly found out like some companies choose not to do anything. They are like, we don't want to change. People resist change. So they like, okay, something will happen and we will become more productive going forward. Or some companies do make an effort. So in my research, I came across like what are the actual challenges that in industry usually the companies find out that their teams are facing. So I attended a conference, QCon, earlier, and like I came across this really interesting book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. How many of you have read it? Good. So, very popular author. If you are in a leadership or management position, you should definitely refer to this. And the other book is The Advantage. I would highly recommend both the two books if you are trying to do anything around your teams and how they're working. So, the author talks about, and in his research, he narrowed it down to the 5 things that primarily constitutes like why teams are not working that cohesively or they're not productive. So absence of trust, people don't trust each other. They have a fear of conflict, that if they say something or they do something differently, they'll get into a conflict, and it's a human tendency to avoid conflicts. And there is lack of commitment. It primarily comes often with that of unclarity of goals, like people don't understand goals, so they don't commit to those goals. And avoidance of accountability. My screen is, but that is avoidance of accountability, and that again comes from leadership. If you're in a leadership position, many a times the people in management positions they don't have themselves accountable to failure. So, and teams often follow by example. So that is another thing that came from the writer's research, that accountability is an important piece. And the last point is inattention to results. That the results are not clear and people are not driven by that what exactly they are achieving at the end of the day. And their main focus is like, okay, I'm coming, I'm doing my work, that's it. I don't care about what the end goal is or what we are delivering at the end of the day. And so given these 5 dysfunctions of the team, I moved on to my next stage. It's like, okay, I have an idea that what might be the areas that I need to work with my teams to figure out that we need to improve. Then next thing was like, how exactly does the big companies fix this problem on their end? So if I can get some clues from there. So a study was done by Google around their 180 teams, and this article was published in New York Times. So it was Google's quest to find out what constitutes a perfect team. Anyone has read this study? Yeah. Another popular article from New York Times, very famous, and again, any talk that have been related to teams, people refer to this study because the amount of teams that they covered was humongous, and like none of us have that kind of wide spectrum to actually look at. So Google is a great example. And so one thing that they narrowed down for teams to be more productive was psychological safety, that teams need to feel safe. So they need to have, I'll read out the below sentence for you, shared. So that defines what psychological safety is. Shared belief held by members of a team that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So they need to feel safe, and they need to be safe to take any risks within their team and the organization that are working on. So I have this link in my slides if you guys want to refer to later on. This is another great article. And so then it came to like, okay, I get it. This is what Google did it, but what about my teams? So I started as I was working with the team. I was going through their challenges. I started building on this phenomena that there are major 4 aspects that I need to strengthen in my teams to make them more productive. And I call this engineering pillars frameworks. And as I said, like I started with 2 teams. I have now 5 teams. And at Dow Jones, we are now experimenting that how this framework can be applied to teams that are like beyond my teams, like other engineering departments, and we are having really good success in doing that. So the 4 engineering pillars talks about that these are the 4 primary pillars in any engineering team that if strengthened, paid attention, and nurtured and provided all the resources on these 4 particular areas, the teams would become more productive and flourish, and your engineers would be more happy. Now, what constitutes each pillar at a high level would be same, but it's very flexible. As I said, I'm experimenting and trying to apply those other areas. So you can add things to this as per your team and your challenges and the areas that you think are additional to what at the high level I'm talking about. And I have had regular debates and conversation with my team and my peers, and I haven't yet come across a category which does not fit into 4 of these, and I'll have to add another pillar. But if you have a different scenario, feel free to do that, but 90% of the time, things should fall into one of these 4 buckets. So now I'm gonna walk you through one of my teams that I found most interesting and challenging to make them more effective. And I'll walk you through that, how exactly and what all did we do to apply each pillar for them, make it more strong and effective for those guys. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about what that team is and what are their challenges. And this team was called Team Kangaroo. And in a while, I'll come back to, I'll explain what is the Kangaroo name refers here. So I'm based out of New York. My office is right 2 blocks from here, but my entire team is based in Minneapolis. So that was my first biggest challenge, that how do I work with this team? Many of you think, like, why don't you just move there? I was like, I have a house here in Connecticut. I have a baby. At that time, she was 9 months old. So it was not possible for me to travel very frequently. So I used to do day trips, go in the morning at 3 a.m., come back at 12 in the night. So to work with the team, and that was the solution that I had. But we used a lot of Hangouts and other things. And that particular office, due to some circumstances within that area, had a huge attrition just before I moved in. So I was told, like, this team strength was around 10, and now you have 3 engineers to work with the same amount of work that needs to be produced. So imagine this team was 10 years old. They have systems that they have been working from 10 years, and now they're left with 3 engineers. And what made things worse was every engineer worked in its own silo, in its own zone, and they owned a system. They never shared information between the systems. They never shared knowledge. So not one person knew everything about other systems. So if there was an issue, only that person could solve it. And as we say, like, people hate documentation. There was no documentation in place for any of this. And since they all worked in their own thing, they were their own teams, they were their own processes, so they never followed even waterfall. Like, forget about agile. Like, they didn't have anything. So imagine what I was getting into. So, given a lot of legacy, all the systems that they had were on-prem. There was nothing in the cloud. And here we are serving millions and millions of users. So those old hardware that we had were, like, almost giving up. This last week, we upgraded our staging environment. So, like, we have to. So these are, like, some of the challenges that I have had with this team when I started 2 years ago. So now I'm going to walk you through that how exactly did we apply the pillars framework to help each team build up on some of these points, and also kind of moving on to the next level. So let's talk about the people framework. So as the people framework for this, the first thing that we did was to roll out our career ladders. So how many of the companies, like startups, have some sort of, like, a loose framework, but big companies, how many of you do have some sort of career ladder in place? So not everyone. People think that it's something that, like, only big companies do, but trust me, I've been part of startups, early startups, mid startups, and enterprise. I've seen it all, and people need to know that what's next for them. And so therefore career ladders are very important. So we rolled it out our entire engineering department. So not just this team, but everyone else across engineering was able to figure out now, like, okay, where I am and how exactly can I move to the next level. And having those clear career ladders and roles and responsibility for each person helped us that, okay, we have these people on the team, how can we add additional support? So we added a program manager, a project manager, so that we can have some processes in place for that team. And in their new roles, people were empowered to make decisions. It's like, I'm your manager, but at the same time, like you in your role, you have been working on the system for 10 years. You should be the person who's making decisions. So we empowered our engineers to make decisions on management's behalf and kind of like having that open communication with them. And we promoted collaboration. So earlier, like Dow Jones has a very distributed team. Like we have a team here in New York, Princeton, Minneapolis, London, Barcelona, Hong Kong, and California. So there are a lot of teams, but teams were in their silos. We are still working on this thing across department, but we are trying to make teams more and more collaborative, not necessarily putting people like picking one person from each office and putting them on a project. Like that's never going to work. Like never try that. Instead, actually having people to talk and collaborate on ideas. So like you can work on your own project, but let's do initiatives where people come together and try to solve common problems with each other's experience. So we are promoting travel among offices. Something we started last year, like we started our own handbook. So what this handbook constitutes is like, how do you do anything within Dow Jones Engineering. So it's an 18-chapter book, a lightweight thing, but it's kind of for an introductory purposes for that how people go about doing it. I know it sounds funny, but at the same time, like when you're working with 500 plus engineers, people often ask the same question again and again and again, and then you lose that and through communication channels, like you miss you're doing. Like you're not doing justice to sending right information to the right people. Like very basic thing is like, how do I go about posting a job posting? So our HR would have 10 emails every week asking the same question. Or how do I, like I'm starting this, gonna use this new tool. I'm gonna use Terraform for this thing. Has anyone in the company used it? Like, how do you find out? So we use Slack, but not every developer is on Slack all the time to answer that question. So therefore, having that handbook is helping us. It's a collaboration thing. People came together to write it, and it's their own thing. It's by developer, for developer, so that they use it. And we are doing a lot of lightning talks in this particular office. So that is also promoting sharing of best practices and sharing of knowledge, and also like now people from different offices are pitching in, so it's becoming more of a collaboration thing where people can pitch in ideas and work on things together and share their knowledge. So, and when it came to like after we had a people framework in place, we started on the delivery piece. So as I mentioned, that this particular team did not had any sort of workflow in place. So the first thing we did was adopted Agile and a loose Agile. So it's very tough. Like people often think is like, okay, I have this new idea from today on, I'll start doing this thing. And for some teams who are been around for long, like you have to come with a very different mindset when you're coming from a startup versus a company that has been around for a long time. So you really need to have a buy-in there. So we started gradually, and we started from lightweight Scrum, but now we are into a phase where team is fully agile. They have their all the ceremonies that you need in Agile in place, and all the processes that Agile talks about, team is practicing in them and improving on a day-to-day basis. And we worked on our communications. We started having very clear roadmaps and deliverables that the team needs to work on. And they started setting up their continuous integration environment. And we are now breaking up everything into all the monolithic giants system that we had into microservices. And one of the biggest success that we had with that team was on-call support rotation. Since as I mentioned, that like there were individual engineers owning individual components, whenever the production issues would come in, the same person had to reply and attend to that issue. So now with this on-call support rotation, there is one person who is dedicated to handling production issues, and everyone else work on their own thing. So distraction is one of the biggest pieces that why engineers are not effective, because they're being pulled into various things time and again. So having this on-call rotation helped with distraction and also helped a lot with knowledge sharing. So teams, like when you see a problem, you try to troubleshoot and with the information that you have, and then you try to get input from others who have expertise in that area. And with the hiring that we did, it was that's like in the resource bit, we actually like since we lost so many engineers, like after we had the team at a certain stable level, then we jumped into hiring. Many people would think it was like, okay, you lost so many engineers, 70% of your strength. Like, why wouldn't you start hiring right away? It's like, that is never a good idea. Never attempt that, because like you are bringing in new energy into a broken system. And you'll turn off those engineers and they'll right away leave in a month. It's like, this is a disaster. I cannot work here. So you would never want to do that. So we first got the teams to a stable state, and then we hired engineers. And the best thing about the hiring was like all our hires were through referrals. So we were able to fill all the engineers back, all the referrals, and like 2 of the people who used to work with us 5 years ago came back and joined us. So there was a huge buy-in that like they could see that there is a cultural difference, things were done differently. So that was proven within a short time frame of couple of months that people saw that there was an improvement, and we were able to hire. And we made like some of the people who are coming from startup background that might find challenging to understand like why budget planning is a huge process. It's like at an enterprise level, and when you're a public company, you need to have some proper budget planning in place. And we have at least like 10, 15 publications of our own. So we have so many teams working on it, and there are priorities from business. So we got these teams, which were never part of any budget planning session. Therefore, resources were constrained for this team. So since we had clear roadmaps, we were now able to have clear budget planning for these teams. And the next thing that we did after getting stable, after getting engineers, was to move all that on-prem thing into cloud. So the cloud migration project, when they were planning it, then there's like, okay, that's when they came up with the name Kangaroo, because that's the hop that they are doing from on-prem to cloud. So we have just finished. Last week, we wrapped up our hop 1, and we are hoping by December we'll do the hop 2. So all our monolithic, gigantic systems will move to cloud. And we are like, our entire team is like dying to turn those servers off sometime next year. So that will be our huge win. And time tracking. How many of you do time tracking in their jobs? Yeah, a good amount of you. So that's, as much as we hate it, that's part of our ecosystem that we have to work with. Do many of you know why we have to do it? Why is it important? I recently sat down before, like I was on maternity leave last couple of months. I sat down on an audit just before going on leave for my team. And as a public company, you need to have audit around how much capital work you are doing. So that's where funding comes through. So it's very important at that level that you need to have proper time tracking to amount to like what exact work you are doing. So as much as it's important, I get it. But what I don't have buy-in is like, why do you want my engineers to do it? Because it's a waste of time. They don't like it. So and that was their biggest concern. So what we did is, and very generously, my project manager stepped in as like, instead of nagging these people every other day to fill their timesheets, I'm happy to do myself. So she actually started doing everyone's timesheet beforehand. Like she has her script, she runs it, she does it in Excel. Like it takes her half the time than actually nagging people to fill it. And a couple of months ago, we started a pilot around using Slack to do the timesheets. So someone built a Slack bot as part of our hackathon, and we are now using Slack to do the timesheets. So it's much easier for engineers to use Slack versus doing timesheets in Jira. And how many of the people here have some sort of vendor engagement on their projects? So vendor engagement, I mean like some consultants and any outsourcing. A little bit. Okay. So, like I was a consultant at one point of time, but when I was working with my last startup, I like hated, like, why do you want to do that? Like, why can't you just hire full-time engineers, and why do you want to engage with partners? But again, my learning as a leader in this company is that not every project has a lifetime of application. Like, I want to try something for a few months and see how does that work. For that kind of thing, I don't want to hire people just to lay them off later down the lane. So that would be a bad thing than actually hiring vendors that you have to let go people. So those are the scenarios where you have to quickly ramp up and quickly ramp down. A vendor engagement is very, very recommended. So if you're working in a big company, have a proper vendor engagement in place. So in that office, and that was also easier for us to ramp up quickly because we were not able to hire that fast because of our budget constraint and hiring constraint, talent constraints. So we had established a vendor engagement in that office so that we have staff augmented and we could add people as needed and with the skills that we really required. So we had a good partnership with an existing vendor and we started building on it. And the last piece is very important, and I was passionate about adding as as an additional pillar instead of adding it to as a subcategory into other pillars. Was even when we did our career ladder work, we had a clear sight around how an individual contributor, like not everyone wants to become a manager, and that's a horrible idea that you promote your best of the engineers to become a manager and then let them slip through their entire career and they become horrible. So not everyone is made for becoming a manager, and people need to have a certain type of aptitude to work with people to become people manager. So we really strengthened our individual contributor path in our career ladder, and we created something called distinguished engineers. So very highly experienced engineers within the company. We don't hire from outside on this role. We only promote from within, and these people are now supporting the teams in prioritizing their tech debt and working with the teams to share technologies, come up with ideas, do experimentation, and a engineer-driven governance process wherein people can look up for questions, comments, feedback when they're trying new technologies or they have challenges within their teams. So these were the 4 pillars that I walked you through about the scenario for the team Kangaroo that we implemented. And we are using this in a different way at a different scale, but not necessarily every team will have every problem here. We are working on other areas at different time. You might be working on a different pillar, but this is an ongoing exercise. So here are some take-home things because I know I walked through a lot of things, but at a high level, these are few things that I would say, like, if anything you want to take away from this talk, like, these are the high-level things that you should focus on. So when you're hiring, focus on the skills that someone is bringing on board. Like, we are way past that time where we actually, like, I want roles with these skills, and you expect that you'll get a perfect person to hire in that. or you would like hire someone and you try to train that person on some of the skills that were missing. So in a huge churn environment that we are in right now, it's wise to like hold on to the best talent that comes through your pipeline and then create a role for that person to be effective and be happy and be able to help in your company. And the next step would be to provide those clear roles and responsibility for that individual, that how exactly they can be productive, they can be effective, and they can be happy and contribute to the company goals. And empower those individuals to be successful, to make their own decisions and thrive through the company. And the last one is do this exercise. Like, it's not a one-time thing. Like, don't expect that you'll do this now and you're done forever. This realignment you need to do on a regular, I would say 6 months to a yearly basis, and or if there is a change. If you have a new hire, do the entire realignment with the team. It's like a new person is introduced, do people still have clarity around like who is doing what? I have this very interesting thing, like happens a lot on the teams that I see, at least through Dow Jones, like program manager, project manager, product managers. They have this overlapping thing, and like every time I work with the person who has this role, they're like, okay, am I supposed to do this, or this person is supposed to? So they keep kind of overlapping each other, and then you have those awkward planning meetings. It's like, oh, this was supposed to be my job. Why is that person doing it? So rather than having those conversations in planning meeting as a manager, it's good to have that clarifications beforehand in your one-on-ones. So this was my engineering frameworks, thoughts, questions, ideas. I think I still have 10 minutes left for questions. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, when you do a ladder for technical careers, I find in dealing with my own team that the higher you move up, the less it's technical stuff. It becomes very subjective stuff about communicating and working with teams outside of engineering and stuff like that. I'm curious as to like what kind of metrics or benchmarks, or like how do you know when somebody is ready to move up to the next level that you can document it?
So I am a huge fan of actually trying things and then moving someone into a new role. So I have I've seen people miserable that you promoted someone and then like 3 months down the line is like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. So when someone what we did as part of career ladder work, we had clear responsibilities that for this role, these are the things that you need to do. And if someone is interested in promotion, or you want someone to be promoted, have that open conversation as like, you are doing all these things to move up. These are all the things you need to do. And I actually have them be part of that role before actual promotion for a couple of months, so that they experience that what they're actually going to do. So and it's worked really, really like effectively. And on all these teams that I'm talking about, I have done that with 4 or 5 people. So before actual promotion, they were in that role for 4 or 5 months. So it was very effective. I would highly recommend that, like a trial period.
Is that right?
Yeah.
So you mentioned changing the technical career path. How did you do that for just Team Kangaroo without that being reflected across the entire organization?
No, we did across the organization. So the career ladders were rolled out through the entire engineering department. And since I was most passionate about, I initiated it. Our head of engineering really loved the idea, and we got on board with our HR and started doing it. So it was a long process. You get to net legal and everyone involved, but we were able to do it last year for everyone. And it's, again, I would say it's not a one-time thing. We are still having conversation around like, what does it mean for many people, and like this review cycle, what would it mean? And because we'll actually do the promotion based on the career ladders this time, which would be the first time. So, and specifically on the Team Kangaroo, we did some realignment on the existing engineer. We promoted one person as a manager, one person as one of the distinguished engineers, and then brought in the team under that new manager. So having that career ladder in place was helpful in even hiring, because we had a clear manager to onboard the team. Thank you.
We're going to go over here.
Hi, we're having a lot of the same conversations about promotion and senior people getting away from engineering. So I'm curious to hear more about how you define and distinguish this distinguished engineer role.
Yeah.
Like, what makes that different from what comes before it, and how do you know when people are at that level?
Yeah. So we have the career ladder looks like software engineer, senior lead, principal, senior principal, and distinguished, and then a fellow. Only one person as a fellow across the company. So the distinguish between these levels is just since you asked, I'll answer that bit. A principal or a senior principal is a person who's focused on one of the big teams or technologies, and they are championing that, and they are driving the whole architecture and guiding and mentoring the engineers with them. Whereas the distinguished engineers is above teams. They are not embedded in teams, versus they are spread across a platform or a product or multiple teams, and help them make decisions, and then they go back as a group together and talk about, share ideas, share feedback around technology choices. So they work at a level that is spread across all the engineering department. So it's above all the teams. Yeah, welcome. Hi.
Hi. You said the team went from 10 engineers to 3.
Yes.
How did you handle all the work that still had to be done at the level of 10 engineers with only 3?
So we had to slow down for sure. At that time, our biggest priority was production issues, because for us, the most important thing was keep the lights on. We cannot have our existing customers suffer. So therefore, having a program manager in place was also one of the key factors. That person could work with stakeholders and go through prioritization. I was like, okay, we have 10 things to do. What is most important here in that particular week? And then who has the expertise? And we also brought in people from other teams in the company who had some context around those applications. And then most of the, for the first 6 months, they were actually digging in the code and figuring out, what exactly is it. We had to deprioritize a lot of our work. And the Kangaroo project, the cloud migration project, started almost 6 to 8 months after we did everything. Hiring was done, people were ramped up, and then we kicked off that project. So it has to be. So what I walked you through was last 2 years. So it was a huge span of time that we did everything in stages. Cool.
You've spoken about empowering people. I'm wondering, at what point do you just give up if it doesn't work, or?
So the empowerment piece, if when you empower someone, there is a manager that I'm currently working with. He was an engineer for a long time on the same team, and then he was interested in becoming a manager. And we trained him. We saw that there is a potential, and we made him manager after a couple of months trial period. Since he was engineer with the same group of people, like the other 2 engineers and other people in the office, it was challenging for him to embrace that being a manager. So in the beginning, I was helping because I was doing coaching and mentoring to understand what a manager position is. But then I had to step back. I was like, it's your thing, work with it. So, and giving some more critical feedback and telling him you really need to feel that you're a manager. So that empowered thing, it was not coming naturally, because as engineers, people necessarily don't think that way. So coaching, mentorship, and at times letting person be on their own. Yeah.
All right, so sorry about that. We have time for just about 2 more questions, so go ahead.
Hi, could you go a little more in depth into the engineer-driven governance and how all that works?
So, so the whole, many, I would say, big companies need to have some sort of governance process so that you don't have 10 technologies that do the same thing within the company, and people prefer to share knowledges. Initially, in years before I joined, the governance process looked like our CTO dictating what needs to be done, but that was years ago, and I don't know exactly how many years ago, so that people cannot really pinpoint that, okay, this was the CTO after this talk. The governance process that we have in place now, that the fellow engineers and the distinguished engineers, they work together, then most of our cloud migration projects, we had a full LAMP project running last year, which was across all the department. We moved things to cloud. So what technology choices we were making, how we were actually setting up our landing zones. So this group was debating and figuring out what works for what team. And at the end, it's not that everyone had to follow whatever they came up with, but with a clear understanding of pros and cons and the choices that the team needs to make. Some people made their own solutions and the others followed what was in place. So there is a room for what you want to try, but let's have conversation around it. So primarily driven by the distinguished engineers and some senior engineers, and the engineering managers do get involved and provide their feedback. And they do regular architecture reviews also in case of cloud projects, with Amazon engineers to know that we are on track as from the industry standards. Oh, last question. Hi.
Hey, first of all, thanks for sharing with us today. I'm curious about a detail about the collaboration slide. It was something about a lightning talk.
Talks, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just to know more about this, what is it about?
So we do every other week for half an hour. We do lightning talks in our Minneapolis office, where the entire office gets together. They have beer and pizza, and two people present about any idea, anything they can talk about. Someone attended a conference and they had if someone was here, they heard few topics from this, and they'll go back and present and lightning talk, oh, this was the cool thing that was discussed in this particular talk. Or someone is passionate about gaming, so that person actually demoed that, how does he play games? So what is he passionate about? Some people are passionate about some sports, or they go skiing. So whatever their passion is, they talk about. But lately it has been about knowledge sharing. Not necessarily technical, every kind of knowledge sharing. And it's I was talking yesterday, we are booked for next 3 months. That's how popular it is. And because people like to present their ideas, when you get good feedback, that's also a motivation factor. So it's has really been helpful in changing the culture in that office. Cool. Awesome. I think that was, thank you so much for coming. Thank you.